My name is Arabella Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 days after we buried my father, my mother and brother cornered me in our childhood living room and demanded I sign away my entire inheritance to keep the peace. They told me the family needed to move forward. They said a good sister would step aside. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I told them I would be happy to sign, right after they signed one specific document for me first. They laughed at my request. That night, I made a single phone call. By sunrise, they were begging me to tear up the papers. What I found in a misdelivered bank envelope is the reason I am telling you this now. Welcome back to QT Told Stories. This is where quiet women finally clear their throats and let the paperwork do the shouting. If this is your first time here, settle in. Drop your age in the comments so I know who is listening, and be sure to subscribe. I should tell you who I am before I explain what they tried to do. I am a supply chain auditor for a corporate firm in Pennsylvania. I spend my days tracing missing inventory, finding the truth hidden inside spreadsheets, and holding vendors accountable. I have paid my own rent since I was 20. My family calls me the reliable one. In their vocabulary, that translates to the daughter who handles the quiet emergencies and never expects gratitude. My older brother Preston is 35. He is charismatic, quick with a joke, and perpetually one bad decision away from financial ruin. Our mother Brenda has spent 3 decades paving the road in front of him, so he never has to feel the bumps. 3 days after my father Harrison passed away, I sat on the floral sofa in Brenda's living room. The house still smelled like funeral lilies and stale coffee. Brenda handed me a manila folder. Inside was a quitclaim deed for 40 acres of land in Bucks County. My father had left it to Preston and me in equal shares. Brenda stood over me, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She said Preston's business was struggling, that he needed the equity from the property to stay afloat, and that family sacrifices for family. I looked at Preston. He sat in my father's armchair looking appropriately solemn. He leaned forward, telling me the medical bills from Dad's final weeks in hospice had drained the estate's liquid assets, leaving the Bucks County real estate as the only lifeline. I watched his hands as he gestured. On his left wrist sat a pristine Rolex Submariner, a $15,000 watch on a man allegedly facing imminent bankruptcy. I kept my face blank. I did not point it out. I closed the manila folder. I told them I understood the urgency, but my profession required me to read any legal contract thoroughly before signing my name. I said I would take the deed home and review the clauses. Brenda let out a sharp, impatient sigh, the sound she reserved for when I was being difficult. She told me not to drag this out, that Preston had deadlines to meet. I stood up, put my coat on, and gathered my purse. On my way out the front door, I stopped at the mail console table in the foyer. A stack of envelopes sat there, sorted carelessly. One envelope caught my eye. It was from my father's primary bank, addressed to his estate, marked urgent. Brenda was still in the living room, comforting Preston. I slipped the envelope into my pocket, along with the deed. When I got to my car, I locked the doors and tore the seal open. It was a final statement for his primary checking account. The balance read 0. The estate was not empty because of medical bills. Someone had cleared it out, and the Bucks County property was just the next item on their list. I drove back to my apartment in a quiet suburb of Philadelphia with the bank notice sitting on my passenger seat like an unexploded shell. I walked inside, locked the door, and went straight to my home office. My profession dictates that numbers tell a story, and when a story does not make sense, you follow the math until it does. I opened my laptop and created a blank spreadsheet. I call this building a shadow ledger. It is a polite way my brain processes ugly discrepancies. Column A was for dates. Column B was for expected income. Column C was for known expenses. My father, Harrison Miller, spent 40 years working as a district manager for a regional freight company. He was a man who measured his life in practical choices. He drove sensible sedans until the transmissions failed. He wore suits he bought on sale. Every Sunday evening, he sat at our kitchen table and balanced his checkbook with a silver pen. He taught me the rule of compound interest when I was 12. I knew for a fact that he kept a dedicated liquid savings account, a safety net he swore he would never touch unless a catastrophic emergency occurred. That safety net should have contained a minimum of $200,000. The notice in my pocket declared a balance of 0. I spent the next 2 hours filling in the rows of my shadow ledger, calculating his pension, his Social Security deposits, and his estimated living expenses over the last 5 years. The math was definitive. A vast sum of liquid cash was missing. My phone vibrated on the desk. The caller ID showed my mother. I answered on the third ring, keeping my voice level. Brenda did not offer a greeting. She launched directly into a script she had clearly rehearsed. She told me she had set up an appointment for me to visit a man named Lyle tomorrow morning. Lyle was apparently a lawyer Preston had found to handle the estate. She insisted I needed to go to his office and sign the quitclaim deed for the Bucks County property immediately. I asked her why the sudden rush was necessary. We had just buried my father. Probate courts move slowly by design. Brenda sighed, a sharp intake of breath meant to convey deep disappointment. She claimed the property taxes were piling up, and Preston needed the land transferred into his name so he could leverage it to save his logistics startup. She painted a picture of a family teetering on the edge of ruin, needing a swift resolution to move forward. She used the word family 4 times in a 2-minute conversation. In Brenda's world, family meant shielding Preston from the consequences of his own actions. When Preston crashed his first car at 17, Brenda paid the damages out of pocket and told my father it was a hit and run. When Preston dropped out of a costly university program, Brenda blamed the professors. Her insistence on speed was not about property taxes. People who have nothing to hide hand you the documents and wait. People who rush are trying to outrun a paper trail. I told her I would review the deed and get back to her. I ended the call before she could start another guilt trip. The next morning, I did not go to Lyle's office. Instead, I put on a tailored blazer, placed my father's original death certificate and my own birth certificate into a leather folder, and drove to the downtown branch of Harrison's Bank. As a direct heir at law, I possessed a clean legal right to request basic account transcripts, even before the formal probate process began. I sat across from a branch manager, presented my identification, and cited the specific state banking statutes that granted me access to the transaction history of the deceased. The manager clicked her mouse a few times, her expression neutral. Then she paused. She looked at the screen, frowned slightly, and hit print. She handed me a stack of 6 pages. I thanked her, walked to my car, and spread the papers across the passenger seat. The account history painted a clear and devastating picture. The depletion of my father's life savings did not happen gradually over years of medical treatments. It happened in 3 substantial, rapid strikes. On October 12th, a wire transfer of $75,000 exited the account. On October 19th, a second wire transfer of $80,000 followed. On October 26th, a final transfer of $42,000 drained the remaining balance to 0. I pulled a small notebook from my purse and checked the dates. October 12th was the day my father was transferred into an inpatient hospice facility. October 19th was the day his physician increased his morphine dosage to manage his severe pain. By October 26th, Harrison Miller was unresponsive, unable to open his eyes, let alone authorize a complex financial transaction. I stared at the black ink on the bank transcript. The conflict shifted from a toxic family dispute into something much darker. I opened my phone and went to Preston's social media pages. My brother loves to document his own perceived success. I scrolled back through his timeline to late October. There it was, a photo posted on October 30th. Preston, standing on the balcony of a high-rise luxury condominium in Center City, holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "New beginnings, big things coming." I cross-referenced the luxury building's leasing requirements online. Securing a penthouse in that specific tower required a first-month deposit, a last-month deposit, and a security fee that equaled 6 figures up front. I looked at the wire transfer dates again. The cash had moved out of a dying man's account and straight into the hands of his golden child. My father had not been bankrupted by the healthcare system. He had been looted by his own son. The $15,000 Rolex on Preston's wrist suddenly made perfect sense. The urgent push to make me sign over the Bucks County land was not a desperate attempt to save a failing business. It was the second phase of a heist. They had already taken the cash. Now they wanted the real estate, and they needed my signature to get it. My family members were not just greedy and entitled. They were active thieves. I started my car and drove back to my apartment, my mind categorizing the evidence. I needed to understand exactly what mechanism Preston used to move that money. Banks do not authorize six-figure wire transfers without authorization. He had to have presented some form of legal documentation to bypass the security protocols. When I walked through my front door, the red light on my answering machine was blinking. I pressed play. The voice that filled the room was sharp, impatient, and dripping with unearned authority. It was Lyle, the supposed family lawyer. He did not bother with a polite introduction. He stated that Brenda had informed him of my reluctance to sign the quitclaim deed. He claimed my hesitation was causing undue financial distress to the estate and my mother. His tone shifted from professional to threatening within 3 sentences. He warned me that if I did not appear at his office by Friday afternoon to sign away my portion of the Bucks County land, he would file a petition to have me entirely excluded from the probate proceedings. He claimed he could lock me out of the estate permanently and saddle me with the legal costs of the delay. The message ended with a harsh beep. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Today was Tuesday. Lyle had just given me a 72-hour ticking clock. He thought the threat of a Friday deadline would panic me into compliance. He thought I was just a quiet sister who could be bullied by legal jargon and artificial urgency. He did not realize he had just handed a forensic auditor a precise timeline to dismantle his entire operation. I sent a brief text message to Preston on Wednesday morning. I told him I needed to go over a few minor details regarding the quitclaim deed before Friday, suggesting we meet for lunch. He chose a high-end steakhouse downtown, a place known for $100 cuts of meat and valet parking. The choice itself was a confession. A man drowning in legitimate debt does not suggest dining at a prime restaurant. I arrived early and secured a booth near the window. 10 minutes later, a sleek, midnight blue Range Rover pulled up to the valet stand. It still possessed the temporary dealer tags. Preston stepped out. He wore a tailored navy suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. He tossed his keys to the attendant with the casual arrogance of a man who believes the world owes him a designated parking spot. My brother had spent his entire adult life bouncing between failed business ventures. He started a tech company that produced zero software. He launched a boutique logistics firm that lost its only 3 clients within a year. Brenda always covered his shortfalls, blaming a bad economy or unappreciative partners. Now he was walking into a restaurant looking like a corporate titan, funded by the stolen savings of a dead man. He slid into the booth across from me, flashing a wide, practiced smile. He ordered a bourbon neat before looking at the menu. I ordered sparkling water. Preston leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished mahogany table. He immediately launched into the narrative Brenda had undoubtedly coached him to deliver. He spoke in hushed, dramatic tones about the heavy burden he had been carrying. He described the crushing weight of our father's final medical expenses. He spun a tragic tale about predatory healthcare costs and hidden facility fees, wiping out the liquid cash, leaving the Bucks County property as the sole remaining asset. He played the victim beautifully. He sighed, rubbing his temples, claiming he was losing sleep trying to save the family from financial ruin. He said he just wanted to honor Dad's legacy and get the estate settled so we could all grieve in peace. I sat there and listened. I did not interrupt. I nodded at the appropriate intervals, maintaining the posture of a quiet, trusting sister. When the waiter brought our meals, I took a slow sip of my water and offered a sympathetic smile. I told him I felt terrible that he had shouldered such an immense administrative task alone. I said I wanted to do something to help, something small, to show my appreciation for the hospice staff. I asked him for the name of the billing administrator at the facility. I explained I wanted to send a handwritten thank you note and a gift basket to the financial office for being so patient with the family during the transition. Preston froze. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. A microscopic twitch tightened the corner of his left eye. Liars excel at painting broad, emotional strokes, but they often stumble on the mundane details. He set his fork down and cleared his throat. He said the billing department was a faceless corporate entity that sending a basket would be a waste of time. I kept my expression mild, offering a gentle push. I mentioned that the wire transfers must have required a specific point of contact to process the funds properly. Preston shifted his weight and the leather booth creaking beneath him. He crossed his arms, defensive now. He claimed he dealt with several different representatives, throwing out a generic name, saying a woman named Sarah handled the final payments. He added that Dad had personally authorized those specific medical invoices in late October to clear his conscience before the end. I logged the perjury in my mind, locking it away in a secure mental file. Late October. By October 20th, our father was heavily medicated on a continuous morphine drip. He could not swallow crushed ice, let alone comprehend a complex medical invoice or verbally authorize a wire transfer. Preston had just anchored his lie to a timeline that contradicted documented medical reality. I softened my voice, playing the role of the impressed sibling. I told him it must have been an administrative nightmare navigating the bank's strict security protocols while Dad was incapacitated. I asked how he managed to move the funds so seamlessly without triggering a fraud alert. Preston took the bait. His ego is his fatal flaw. He cannot resist an opportunity to broadcast his own cleverness. He smiled, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a corporate secret. He proudly revealed that he had anticipated the banking hurdles. He claimed he sat down with Dad right before the decline became severe and had a comprehensive power of attorney drafted. He boasted that this legal instrument gave him full executive control over the accounts, allowing him to bypass the red tape and settle the estate's debts efficiently. He framed it as an act of profound foresight, a son stepping up to protect the patriarch's legacy. My blood ran cold. The steakhouse noise faded into a dull hum. I knew the physical condition of Harrison Miller during his final weeks. His hands shook with severe tremors. He lacked the motor function to hold a pen, let alone execute a legally binding signature on a complex financial document. I did not show a single ounce of suspicion. I offered a warm, validating nod. I told him he had done a remarkable job and that I would review the quitclaim deed tonight. His posture relaxed entirely. He believed he had won. He paid the check with a platinum credit card, leaving a generous tip, the picture of a successful man. We parted ways on the sidewalk. I watched his midnight blue SUV merge into traffic. Then I turned and walked 3 blocks to the county courthouse. I entered the records division. The fluorescent lights hummed above rows of filing cabinets and digital terminals. As an heir, I held the legal standing to view registered estate documents. I approached the clerk at the desk and requested to pull the power of attorney filed under Harrison Miller's name. The clerk typed the information into her system. A few moments later, she handed me a printed copy of the filing. I carried the pages to a quiet reading table in the corner of the room. I laid the document flat. The header indicated it granted broad financial authority to Preston. The effective date was listed as October 18th. I moved my eyes to the bottom of the second page. There was the signature line. I grew up watching my father balance his ledger every Sunday night. I knew the distinct, sharp angles of his handwriting. I knew the way he looped the H and crossed the T. The signature on this page was smooth. It was fluid and steady, displaying none of the jagged hesitation that characterized his actual handwriting during his illness. It was a careful, calculated imitation. It was a forgery. Beneath the forged signature was a notary stamp. The seal belonged to a local notary public, validating a signature that could never have been executed by the man lying in that hospice bed. Preston had not just stolen cash. He had manufactured false legal authority to do it. I folded the document and slid it into my leather portfolio. The ticking clock Lyle set for Friday no longer felt like a threat. It felt like an invitation. My brother and my mother believed I was merely an obstacle they could sweep aside with artificial urgency and emotional blackmail. They thought they were playing a game of family dynamics. They did not realize they had just handed a forensic auditor the exact weapon required to dismantle their lives. I had the motive, I had the stolen funds, and now I possessed the forged paper trail linking them together. I stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air. I pulled out my phone and searched for the name of the most ruthless, independent probate attorney in the state. It was time to show them exactly what a quiet daughter does when she stops being polite. Thursday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky matching the sterile atmosphere of the strip mall where Brenda's chosen legal counsel operated. I parked my car in front of a frosted glass door bearing the name Lyle Vance. He was not a partner at a prestigious downtown firm. He was a volume operator, a man who processed quick evictions, rushed wills, and unscrutinized property transfers. Brenda hired him because a legitimate estate attorney would require audits, waiting periods, and verified signatures. Lyle only required a retainer check. I stepped inside. The reception area smelled like cheap toner and stale air freshener. A receptionist directed me straight back to his office. Lyle sat behind a veneer desk designed to look like solid oak. He wore a rumpled suit and a smile that did not reach his eyes. Without offering a greeting, he slid a crisp, blue-backed document across the desk. It was the quitclaim deed for the Bucks County acreage. He folded his hands over his stomach and launched into his pitch. He did not speak like a neutral legal advisor. He spoke like a desperate salesman trying to close a quota before the end of the month. He claimed the probate courts were backed up for years. He painted a grim picture of escalating property levies and state inheritance fees that would drain my mother's retirement accounts if we waited for standard processing. He leaned forward, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, stating that signing this document today was the only way to shield Brenda from financial ruin. I did not pick up the pen he placed next to the paper. I picked up the deed itself. My daily work involves tearing apart vendor contracts and supply chain compliance agreements. I read the fine print because the fine print is where the traps are set. I scanned the paragraphs of the quitclaim. Within 30 seconds, I spotted 3 glaring irregularities. First, the document listed the consideration value as $1, a standard practice for family gifts, but it included a sweeping indemnification clause. That specific paragraph legally shielded the grantee Preston from any future civil claims regarding the estate's overall distribution. Second, the deed was drafted to transfer my ownership rights, not just to Preston, but to a newly formed limited liability company, where Preston was the sole registered agent. They were not asking me to give my brother a piece of family land. They were asking me to sign away my legal right to ever sue a corporate entity that my brother controlled. I set the paper down and looked Lyle in the eye. I kept my posture relaxed and my voice even. I told him the indemnification clause was overly broad for a simple property transfer. I stated that standard corporate compliance protocol required me to take the contract home for a mandatory 48-hour review. Lyle dropped the salesman's smile. His face flushed a deep, uneven red. He slammed his hand flat against the desk, rattling his coffee mug. He abandoned the pretense of legal counsel and adopted the role of Brenda's enforcer. He pointed a thick finger at me, stating that my difficult attitude was tearing my family apart. He claimed Brenda was already drafting a public statement to the extended relatives, preparing to isolate me from the bloodline if I sabotaged Preston's future. He threatened that if I walked out of his office without signing, he would file an emergency injunction to lock me out of the probate proceedings entirely, forcing me to pay exorbitant court fees out of my own pocket. People who hold legitimate power do not need to raise their voices. People who yell are simply broadcasting their own lack of leverage. I recognized his outburst for what it was. It was fear. He knew the forged power of attorney was brittle. He knew this deed was the final piece they needed to legitimize the theft, and he was terrified I would look too closely. I did not argue. I did not defend my loyalty to my mother. I smoothly folded the quitclaim deed, placed it inside my leather portfolio, and stood up. I thanked him for his time and told him he would hear from my representation shortly. I walked out of his office while he was still shouting empty threats at my back. I did not drive home. I merged onto the highway and drove straight into the city, heading toward a high-rise building in the financial district. 2 days earlier, I had quietly retained Gavin. He was a probate litigator with a reputation for dismantling fraudulent executors. Gavin was not a family friend. He was a shark who wore bespoke suits and billed by the minute. When I walked into his corner office, he was finishing a phone call. He motioned for me to sit. I placed my shadow ledger, the bank transcripts showing the stolen liquid funds, the forged power of attorney, and the freshly drafted quitclaim deed onto his glass desk. Gavin reviewed the documents with silent, mechanical precision. He noted the forged signature, tracing the ink pattern with the back of his pen. He read the indemnification clause in Lyle's deed and let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He looked up at me and asked if I knew why my brother was suddenly operating through a newly registered corporate entity. I admitted I assumed Preston was just trying to shield his personal assets from his past business failures. Gavin turned his monitor toward me. He had pulled up the municipal zoning records for Bucks County. He explained that my father's 40 acres had sat dormant for decades, classified as agricultural reserve. However, 3 months ago, the county council approved a large-scale infrastructure project. A new highway interchange was slated to cut directly through the adjacent parcel. Because of this structural shift, my father's land had been swiftly rezoned for commercial real estate development. Gavin tapped a specific line on the digital map. He stated that commercial developers were currently paying premium rates for contiguous lots in that exact corridor to build logistics hubs and shipping warehouses. The irony was not lost on me. Preston wanted to profit off a supply chain infrastructure, the exact industry I audited for a living. Gavin had run a conservative market analysis while waiting for me to arrive. The land was no longer worth $400,000. The rezoning had spiked the baseline valuation to $2.5 million. The air in the room went still. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place with terrifying clarity. The missing liquid funds from my father's account were not the prize. The $197,000 Preston stole using a forged signature was merely the operating capital. He needed that stolen cash to fund his new luxury lifestyle, pay off his immediate debts, and cover the preliminary legal fees required to establish his LLC. The cash was the appetizer. The Bucks County acreage was the main course. Preston and Brenda were orchestrating a multi-million-dollar heist. They weaponized my father's death and my mother's tears to blind me to the true value of the estate. They expected me to surrender generational wealth simply because they demanded it in the name of family loyalty. Gavin leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He asked me how I wanted to proceed. He offered to file an immediate cease and desist, dragging Lyle and Preston into open court by the end of the week. I looked at the digital map on the screen. A loud court battle would give them time to hide assets and invent new lies. I needed them to feel secure. I needed them to commit to the fraud on paper, in ink, with their own hands. I told Gavin to hold the filings. I instructed him to draft a very specific, singular document for me instead. I was going to give my family exactly what they wanted. I was going to offer them the land. I just needed to invite them to dinner first. The invitation arrived on Friday morning. Brenda called my cell phone, her tone coated in a fragile artificial sweetness. She asked me to come to the house for a reconciliation dinner. She said the grief was tearing us apart and we needed to break bread as a family to find a path forward. I knew exactly what the dinner was. It was a tribunal. Brenda never sought reconciliation. She sought capitulation. When she felt her control slipping, she summoned an audience to apply social pressure. I told her I would be there at 7. I packed my leather portfolio, ensuring the documents Gavin drafted were in perfect order. When I pulled into my mother's driveway, the arrangement of vehicles confirmed my suspicions. My car squeezed in behind a row of familiar SUVs and sedans. Aunt Patricia's silver Lexus sat near the garage. Cousin Mitchell's lifted truck idled on the curb. Brenda had not invited me to a private family dinner. She had assembled a jury. I walked through the front door. The house smelled of roasted chicken and heavy tension. Voices murmured in the dining room, cutting off sharply the moment my heels clicked against the hardwood floor. I stepped through the archway. 6 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Brenda had staged the room with theatrical precision. The good china was out. The crystal wine glasses caught the light from the chandelier. At the head of the long mahogany table, sitting in the exact chair my father occupied for 3 decades, was Preston. He wore a crisp white shirt, the cuffs rolled up to expose his stolen Rolex. He slouched slightly, adopting the posture of a weary patriarch carrying a heavy burden. Aunt Patricia sat to his right, her face arranged in a mask of practiced pity. Cousin Mitchell sat across from her, arms crossed, jaw tight. I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table. No one offered a greeting. No one asked about my day. The meal commenced in stiff, calculated increments. Forks clinked against porcelain. The opening phase of the ambush involved pointed whispers and heavy sighs. Brenda passed the serving dishes, offering extra portions to Preston, loudly insisting he needed his strength after enduring such a grueling month. I ate my food. I observed the performance. In my line of work, you learn to spot collusion. You watch how vendors glance at each other across a boardroom table before answering a direct question. My family communicated the exact same way. Brenda gave a subtle nod toward Patricia. The opening argument began. Patricia set her wine glass down and leaned forward. She aimed her gaze directly at my chest, avoiding my eyes. She said it broke her heart to see Brenda suffering so much. She claimed the stress of the estate was aging my mother prematurely. Patricia always served as Brenda's loyal echo. Growing up, whenever I questioned a household rule or asked for financial transparency regarding my college tuition, Patricia was summoned to remind me how ungrateful I was. Tonight, she played her familiar role. Mitchell picked up the thread immediately. He did not bother with fake sympathy. He leaned across the table, pointing his fork in my direction. He stated that Preston put his entire life on hold to manage Harrison's decline. He painted a vivid, fictional picture of my brother, sitting beside a hospital bed, holding our father's hand through the darkest hours. He accused me of hiding in my corporate office, choosing spreadsheets over my own flesh and blood. He said I had no right to hold the family hostage over a piece of dirt in Bucks County just because I wanted a payout. I looked at Mitchell. I looked at Patricia. I looked at Brenda, who sat with her head bowed, dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. I felt the familiar heat of injustice flare in my chest, but I did not let it reach my face. I cataloged their accusations like discrepancies on a balance sheet. I knew the truth. I had the hospice visitor logs. Preston visited our father exactly twice in 2 months, both times for less than 15 minutes. I knew who sat in the quiet dark, listening to the oxygen machine hum. I knew who held Harrison's hand. It was not the man sitting at the head of the table. Preston finally spoke, timing his entry for maximum dramatic effect. He held up a hand, playing the benevolent peacemaker. He told Mitchell to calm down. He looked down the length of the table at me, wearing a sad, forgiving smile. He said he did not blame me for being disconnected. He claimed he understood that my demanding job made me cold and transactional. He asked me, using a soft, pleading tone, to simply sign the quitclaim deed so he could pay off the crushing medical debts and save the family's legacy. The room held its breath. The extended family stared at me, waiting for my reaction. They expected me to defend myself. They expected me to raise my voice, to list my grievances, to demand respect. If I shouted, they could label me hysterical. If I cried, they could label me weak. They wanted a reaction, because a reaction is a form of surrender. It proves their words have power. I did not give them a reaction. I took a slow sip of my water. I placed the glass down, aligning it perfectly with the edge of my placemat. I looked at Preston. I let the silence stretch until the ambient noise of the house felt deafening. I reached down and unzipped my leather portfolio. I withdrew the blue-backed quitclaim deed Lyle had drafted. I placed it in the center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. The bright blue paper drew every eye in the room. I spoke in a calm, even voice, pitched low enough that they had to lean in to hear me. I said I heard their concerns. I stated that I understood the importance of family unity. I told them I had no desire to fight over a piece of undeveloped land if it was truly causing my mother this much distress. I announced that I was ready to surrender my 50% stake in the Bucks County property. I offered to sign the deed over to Preston tonight, relinquishing my rights to the estate so the family could finally find peace. The dining room fell dead silent. The shock was palpable. Patricia's mouth parted in disbelief. Mitchell blinked, his aggressive posture collapsing into confusion. Brenda looked up, a triumphant gleam flashing in her eyes before she quickly masked it. Preston broke into a wide, victorious grin. The tension bled out of his shoulders. He let out a breathless laugh, slapping the table lightly. He praised my maturity. He said he knew I would eventually do the right thing. He reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a silver pen. He leaned over the table, extending his hand toward the blue document. I placed my palm flat over the center of the quitclaim deed, stopping his reach. I kept my eyes locked on his. I told him I would sign my name and hand over the property on one condition. Preston paused, his silver pen hovering in the air just inches from my hand. He looked at me, his victorious smile faltering for a fraction of a second. He did not know about the shadow ledger. He did not know about the forged bank wires. He did not know I had uncovered the commercial rezoning. He believed he was inches away from securing a $2.5 million windfall. He was entirely unaware he was stepping onto a trap door. Preston's silver pen hovered in the air just inches above the table. The dining room, previously suffocated by tense whispers and sharp sighs, fell into a breathless hush. My brother's eyes darted from my flat palm resting over the blue quitclaim deed up to my face, searching for a trick. He did not possess the discipline to hide his impatience. He let out a short, breathy chuckle, leaning back in our father's armchair. He asked what this condition could possibly be, his tone dripping with the condescension of a man who believes he has already won a grueling negotiation. I did not move my hand from the real estate transfer. I explained that my background in supply chain audits requires a clean, unbroken paper trail for any transfer of major assets. I told him that relinquishing my stake in the Bucks County acreage was a significant financial decision. Before I formalized that surrender, I needed to close the loop on our father's liquid estate. Cousin Mitchell rolled his eyes, crossing his arms over his chest. Aunt Patricia muttered something under her breath about my endless corporate red tape, shaking her head in theatrical dismay. I ignored them both. I focused solely on Preston. I stated that since he had managed the cash accounts and navigated the bank protocols during Harrison's final months, I just needed a standard, formal acknowledgement of that stewardship for my own records. I reached back into my leather portfolio with my free hand. I withdrew a single sheet of stark, white, heavyweight paper. It was not a complex multi-page contract filled with dense legal jargon. Gavin had drafted it to be painfully simple, ensuring there was no room for misinterpretation. I slid the white paper across the mahogany table, positioning it right next to Preston's empty bourbon glass. I told him it was a basic affidavit of accounting. I watched his eyes scan the header. To ensure the extended family understood the stakes, I narrated the contents of the page in a measured, quiet voice. I explained that the document required the acting executor to swear he had fully disclosed the entirety of Harrison Miller's financial holdings. I pointed to a specific itemized clause near the middle of the page. That paragraph explicitly stated that the primary checking and savings accounts were drained exclusively by legitimate, verified medical expenses and end-of-life care facility invoices. It legally attested that zero funds were transferred for personal use, undisclosed gifts, or private business ventures. Preston let out a loud, theatrical groan. He tossed his silver pen onto the table, the metal clattering against the polished wood. He looked down the length of the dining room at Patricia and Mitchell, playing directly to his audience. He mocked my request, calling it absurd corporate paranoia. He asked the room if they could believe his own sister was demanding a sworn receipt for their dying father's medical care. He accused me of treating a family tragedy like a hostile boardroom merger, prioritizing spreadsheets over trust. The extended relatives murmured in agreement, their faces twisting in synchronized judgment. Brenda, however, did not join the chorus of mockery. My mother's eyes were fixed intensely on the blue quitclaim deed still resting under my hand. She knew the stakes. She knew Preston's luxury downtown condo and his new business entity were built on a foundation of stolen money. She believed securing the Bucks County land would bury that theft forever, covering their tracks with a new, legitimate influx of capital. She saw the finish line. She leaned over and placed a reassuring hand on Preston's shoulder. She told him to just humor me. She used a soothing, maternal tone, insisting that if a silly piece of paper was all it took to put this nightmare behind them, he should just sign it and be done. She told him I was always overly rigid about rules, and this was just another minor hoop to jump through for the sake of family harmony. She squeezed his shoulder, her eyes silently urging him to close the deal. Preston picked his pen back up. He spun it between his fingers, clearly annoyed, but eager to secure the multi-million-dollar land transfer. He pulled the white affidavit toward him. He did not read the fine print. Con men rarely do. They rely on momentum and charm, assuming structural rules apply only to other people. Because Brenda had bailed him out of every mistake he ever made, he fundamentally believed consequences were a myth. As the silver tip of his pen touched the signature line, I held up one finger. I stopped him again. I told him to look at the very bottom of the page, right below the line where he was about to write his name. I kept my voice incredibly soft. I read the final sentence aloud, letting the words hang in the still air of the dining room. Signed under penalty of perjury. I looked directly into his eyes, offering a clear, undeniable warning. I stated that signing this document meant he was swearing to the state of Pennsylvania that every single penny of our father's life savings went to the hospice facility and the medical providers. I told him that if there were any discrepancies, any missing funds, or any unauthorized transfers, signing this paper would elevate a family misunderstanding into a criminal offense. I gave him a distinct, deliberate chance to back out. I offered him the opportunity to admit a mistake, to claim he needed to double-check his records, to push the paper away and walk away from the table. Preston scoffed, a short, sharp sound of pure arrogance. He did not hesitate. He did not blink. He said he had nothing to hide from me or anyone else. He pressed the pen to the paper and signed his name with a wide, careless flourish. Brenda let out a long, audible breath of relief. She reached for the pen, took it from his hand, and leaned over the table. She signed her own name on the witness line beneath his, formally verifying his sworn statement. She pushed the white paper back across the polished wood toward me. She smiled a thin, triumphant curve of her lips. She told me the condition was met, and now it was my turn to do the right thing for the family. I lifted my hand from the blue quitclaim deed. I picked up the white affidavit. I checked both signatures. The ink was dark, permanent, and pristine. By placing their names on that page, they had legally locked themselves into a narrative that directly contradicted the bank wire records sitting in my home office. Gavin had warned me that bridging the gap between a toxic civil dispute and federal wire fraud required a documented lie. I now held that lie in my hand. I folded the paper in half with slow, deliberate precision. I slipped it into the inner pocket of my leather portfolio and pulled the zipper shut. The metallic teeth locked together with a sharp, decisive click. The room watched me, waiting for the exchange. They watched the blue quitclaim deed still sitting next to the floral centerpiece. Preston sat back in his chair, rubbing his hands together. his eyes locked on the property transfer that would supposedly fund his future. He was entirely blind to the reality of the situation. He thought he had just outsmarted an auditor. He did not realize I had just secured the exact written proof required to initiate his destruction. My leather portfolio was zipped, the white affidavit secured. The blue quitclaim deed sat alone on the polished mahogany. Preston reached out, his fingers extended, expecting me to push the document toward him. I picked up the blue parchment. I did not uncap a pen. I held the contract in both hands. I maintained unbroken eye contact with the man sitting in my father's chair. I twisted my wrists in opposite directions. The heavy paper resisted for a fraction of a second before yielding with a sharp, crisp tear. I ripped the property transfer straight down the middle. I stacked the two halves, grasped the top edges, and tore them again. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent dining room. I let the confetti of blue paper flutter down onto the floral centerpiece. Preston froze. His brain required 2 full seconds to process the visual information. When the reality registered, the carefully curated facade of the benevolent, grieving son disintegrated into dust. He slammed both fists onto the table. The impact rattled the fine china and tipped a crystal wine glass. A dark red stain bled across the linen tablecloth. He sprang to his feet, knocking his heavy dining chair backward. It crashed against the hardwood floor. He screamed. It was not a protest or a reasoned argument. It was a raw, guttural sound of thwarted entitlement. He lunged across the table, his face contorted into a mask of pure rage. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing. His neck flushed a deep crimson. The veins bulged against his collar. Aunt Patricia gasped, pressing her hands over her mouth. Cousin Mitchell pushed his chair back, visibly alarmed by the sudden, unhinged display. They had spent the entire evening lecturing me about family harmony, convinced Preston was the victim. Now they sat paralyzed, watching the golden child bare his teeth. The illusion of the devoted son shattered right in front of them. Brenda ignored Preston's outburst. Her focus remained entirely on my leather bag. Panic replaced her triumphant smile. She realized the sequence of events. She understood I possessed a sworn legal document, and she possessed shredded blue paper. She rounded the table, her heels clicking rapidly against the floorboards. She ordered me to open the portfolio and hand the white sheet back to her. She stretched her hand out, her fingers trembling, insisting the document was invalid and that I was stealing family property. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage in the shouting match. When you hold the winning hand, you do not need to bang on the table. I stood up. I slung the strap of my portfolio over my shoulder. I picked up my wool coat from the back of my chair and slid my arms into the sleeves. I buttoned it with deliberate, measured movements. Preston continued to yell, shouting crude insults, threatening to ruin me, demanding I draft a new deed immediately. I walked past Brenda. I walked past the red wine soaking into the table linen. I walked down the hallway, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cool evening air. I pulled the door shut behind me, severing the noise. The final sound I heard before the latch clicked was my mother's voice, shrill and frantic, calling my name. I walked to my car, started the engine, and backed out of the driveway. The suburban street was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding inside the house. I drove away, steering toward the downtown financial district. The dashboard clock read 8:45. I called Gavin from the road. I knew he worked late on Thursdays, preparing for Friday morning dockets. He answered on the second ring. I told him I acquired the necessary signatures. He told me to come straight up. The law office was quiet, illuminated only by motion sensor lights in the hallway. Gavin met me at the glass doors. He wore a loosened tie and rolled-up sleeves. We walked into his conference room. The city skyline glowed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, providing a sharp backdrop for the work ahead. I unzipped my portfolio. I laid the documents out on the long granite table in chronological order, treating the evidence with the same methodical care I apply to a corporate audit. First, I placed the bank transcripts showing the missing $197,000. Second, I set down the forged power of attorney, pointing to the date and the fabricated signature. Third, I produced the printed county zoning map, verifying the new commercial valuation of the Bucks County acreage. Finally, I placed the stark white affidavit of accounting at the end of the row. The ink from Preston and Brenda's signatures was dry. Gavin leaned over the table. He read the sworn statement. He cross-referenced the dates on the affidavit with the dates of the wire transfers and the bank ledger. He scrutinized the perjury clause they had willfully signed. He traced the timeline with his index finger, verifying the sequence of events. He exhaled a long, slow breath. He looked up at me, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. He stated that bridging the gap between a messy inheritance dispute and actionable fraud was notoriously difficult. It usually required months of subpoenas and grueling depositions to catch an executor in a documented lie. Civil courts often view missing funds as administrative errors or family misunderstandings, unless you can prove direct malicious intent. I had bypassed the entire discovery process. By signing that single sheet of paper, my brother and my mother legally bound themselves to a fabricated narrative. They swore under oath that the liquid accounts were drained by medical facilities. The bank records proved the cash was wired to a luxury real estate broker and an LLC holding account. The contradiction was stark physical and undeniable. Gavin tapped the white paper. He explained that the conflict had just crossed a critical threshold. We were no longer fighting a civil battle over a piece of land. We possessed ironclad evidence of wire fraud, perjury, and elder financial exploitation. The dynamic shifted from defense to offense. We had the leverage to dictate the terms of their surrender. Gavin walked over to his computer terminal. He woke the screens and opened a blank legal template. He told me we needed to strike immediately while Preston and Brenda were still disoriented from the dinner table confrontation. He began typing with rapid, precise strokes. He drafted an emergency injunction. This specific filing would freeze the probate proceedings, halt any pending property transfers, and alert the municipal court to the existence of a fraudulent executor. The injunction would serve as a formal barricade, preventing Lyle, or Brenda, from attempting to push through a secondary backdated deed. As Gavin typed, the printer hummed to life in the corner of the room. The legal trap was assembled and ready to snap shut. The paperwork would be filed with the county clerk the moment the courthouse doors opened. But courts do not open until 9 o'clock in the morning. Preston would use those hours to scramble. He would likely try to move the stolen funds into an offshore account, drain the remaining credit lines, or attempt to liquidate whatever assets he could access before the gavel fell. I realized filing a motion tomorrow morning was not fast enough. I needed to cut off his access to the Capitol tonight. I looked at the clock on the conference room wall. It was approaching 11. The night was slipping away, and my brother was out there, desperate and cornered. A desperate man with access to digital banking is a dangerous variable. I asked Gavin for a quiet room and a landline. I told him I needed to make one phone call before midnight. I left Gavin in his corner office preparing the emergency injunction for the morning docket. I drove back to my apartment in the quiet Pennsylvania suburbs. The streets were empty, illuminated only by the rhythmic passing of amber streetlights. I walked into my kitchen and turned on the overhead light. The clock on the microwave read 11. I set my leather portfolio on the granite counter. I did not pour a glass of wine to unwind. I brewed a cup of black coffee. I needed a clear, sharp mind for the final maneuver. 3 days earlier, when I requested the initial account transcripts from the branch manager, I noticed a specific alphanumeric code printed next to the largest outgoing wire transfers. In supply chain auditing, anomalous codes signify a manual override or a flagged internal review. A system flags a transaction when the behavior deviates from historical patterns. I had asked the manager about that specific code. She was hesitant, bound by internal privacy policies, but I cited my legal standing as a direct heir and the named beneficiary of the estate. She transferred me to the Regional Fraud Investigation Unit. I spent 40 minutes on the phone with a senior risk analyst named Sterling. He informed me that the transfers had generated an automated suspicious activity report due to the velocity of the cash movement out of a previously dormant account. However, without concrete proof of malicious intent, the institution's hands were tied. Preston held a notarized power of attorney, even if it was forged, which gave him superficial clearance. Sterling gave me his direct extension. He told me to call if I found a documented discrepancy. I pulled my cell phone from my coat pocket and dialed that exact extension. The financial sector never truly sleeps, especially the departments monitoring institutional risk and regulatory compliance. Sterling answered on the third ring. I identified myself, referencing our previous conversation regarding the Harrison Miller estate. I kept my voice flat and factual. I informed him that the required proof of malicious intent had been secured. I told him I possessed a sworn, notarized affidavit from the acting executor explicitly stating that the liquid accounts were drained solely by medical facilities. I unzipped my portfolio and retrieved the stark white sheet of paper. I walked over to my home office desk, opened my laptop, and connected my portable scanner. I fed the affidavit through the machine. The scanner hummed, converting Preston and Brenda's physical signatures into a high-resolution digital file. I attached the file to a secure email portal Sterling provided, along with the forged power of attorney and the printed county zoning map showing the commercial valuation of the Bucks County land. I hit send. I returned to the kitchen and listened to the rhythmic clicking of Sterling's keyboard over the line. A heavy, productive silence settled between us as he read the sworn statement and compared it against the destination routing numbers of the flagged wire transfers. He did not need to ask clarifying questions. The math spoke for itself. He broke the silence, his tone shifting from bureaucratic caution to serious professional engagement. He stated that the document I provided constituted definitive, actionable evidence of elder financial exploitation and federal wire fraud. Sterling explained the immediate protocol. When a financial institution confirms stolen capital has been commingled with personal assets, they do not merely flag the original source account. They initiate a comprehensive, systemic lockdown to prevent further asset flight. He walked me through the procedure step by step. First, the bank would instantly freeze the estate checking account, halting any pending transactions. Next, they would trace the routing numbers to Preston's personal checking and savings accounts. Because Preston used the same banking umbrella to hold his stolen funds, the institution had direct jurisdiction over his entire portfolio. Those personal accounts would be locked. Then Sterling ran a cross-reference on Preston's Social Security number. He identified the commercial line of credit associated with the newly registered limited liability company Preston formed to catch the Bucks County real estate transfer. That corporate account would be suspended. Any credit cards, debit cards, or overdraft protections linked to his profile would be declined. Money is a physical asset moving through a digital supply chain. When my brother wired the cash, he thought it disappeared cleanly into his pockets. He didn't realize cash leaves permanent footprints. Preston had built a house of cards using our father's dying breath as the foundation. Now the bank was pulling the floor out from under him. Sterling pressed a few final keys. He confirmed the asset freeze was active across all integrated platforms. He advised me that federal authorities and the state adult protective services would be formally notified by morning, transitioning the internal review into an active criminal probe. I thanked him for his diligence, wished him a good night, and ended the call. It was approaching midnight. I closed my laptop. I washed my coffee mug in the sink, watching the dark liquid swirl down the drain. I walked to my bedroom, set my alarm for 5:30, and lay down under the covers. I slept deeply. I did not toss or turn. I did not dream of the chaos unfolding in my mother's dining room. The truth provides a very distinct type of comfort. It requires zero maintenance. A lie demands constant, exhausting energy, forcing the liar to continually survey the perimeter for cracks. I had just shattered their perimeter. I woke up a few minutes before my alarm sounded. The sky outside my window was a pale, bruised purple, signaling the approaching dawn. The air in my apartment was still and quiet. I walked back into the kitchen, turned on the overhead light, and started the coffee maker. The rich smell of roasted beans filled the room. I poured a fresh mug, leaned against the granite counter, and watched the digital clock on the stove slowly roll over to 6 in the morning. Exactly 2 minutes later, my cell phone illuminated on the counter. The screen displayed Preston's contact name. The device vibrated an urgent, frantic buzzing against the stone surface. I did not answer. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The screen went dark, registering a missed call. 10 seconds later, it lit up again. Another incoming call from my brother. I stood there and watched the screen flash. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of that cellular signal. Preston had likely tried to purchase a morning coffee, or pay a bridge toll, or log into his banking app to check his balances. He had swiped his platinum card, expecting the seamless transaction of a wealthy man. Instead, he received a glaring red decline notice. He had logged into his portal only to find every single numeric value replaced with a strict administrative hold message. The quiet daughter they underestimated. The sister they tried to bully into surrendering a multi-million-dollar property had not raised her voice once. I had simply filed the correct paperwork with the correct department. My brother woke up expecting to secure a vast real estate empire. Instead, he woke up to find his entire financial existence locked behind an impenetrable digital wall. The phone continued to vibrate, vibrating with the desperate realization that his stolen money was gone and the consequences had finally arrived. My cell phone screen flashed continuously on the granite kitchen counter. Preston's contact identification appeared vanished and reappeared in rapid, unrelenting succession. I did not answer. I finished my black coffee, rinsed the ceramic mug under the tap, and watched the early morning light slowly illuminate the quiet Pennsylvania suburbs. I knew the timeline of banking alerts. Preston was currently discovering the architecture of a frozen asset portfolio. At 6:15, the caller identification shifted. It was Brenda. She did not attempt to call back to back. She left one single, lengthy voicemail. I unlocked my device, opened the secure audio file, and pressed play. My mother usually spoke with a cultivated, even tone, meticulously designed to project maternal authority and moral superiority. The voice echoing through my phone speaker sounded fractured and hollow. She was weeping. These were not the performative, delicate tears she deployed at the dining room table to garner sympathy from Aunt Patricia. These were ragged, hyperventilating sobs born of genuine terror. She begged me to pick up the phone. She pleaded with me to take the stark white affidavit out of my leather portfolio and tear the paper into pieces. She claimed we could start over. She promised we could sit down as a family and renegotiate the Bucks County property transfer without any lawyers involved. She offered to give me a larger share of the land if I just made the paperwork disappear. Then she made a fatal error. In her desperate attempt to justify the situation, she abandoned her fabricated narrative entirely. She sobbed into the receiver, her words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic stream. She explicitly stated she knew Preston took the cash from Harrison's accounts. She defended the theft, sobbing that his boutique logistics startup was collapsing. She revealed he owed dangerous private investors a significant return on their capital, and she insisted my father would have wanted his golden son to survive the crisis. She admitted she helped him secure the forged power of attorney because they fully intended to pay the estate back once the Bucks County land sold to the commercial developers. I listened to the recording a second time, analyzing the cadence. A voluntary confession is a delicate, highly valuable piece of leverage. I did not delete the message. I tapped the screen, selected the audio file, and exported it directly to a secure, encrypted cloud drive Gavin and I shared for evidence collection. Brenda had just handed me a recorded admission of complicity in elder financial exploitation. She placed herself squarely inside the conspiracy, removing any plausible deniability. She was no longer a grieving widow who trusted the wrong son. She was a co-conspirator. The digital clock on my stove read 6:45 when the buzzer echoed through my apartment. My building requires keyed entry. Visitors must press a button on a brass panel in the vestibule to request remote access. The buzzer sounded again. It did not ring in polite, isolated intervals. It blared in one continuous, grating wail. Someone was leaning their entire body weight against the button. I walked down the hallway and approached the intercom screen mounted near my front door. The grainy black and white security camera feed displayed the downstairs vestibule. Preston stood pacing in front of the heavy glass doors. His tailored navy suit from the upscale steakhouse lunch was gone. He wore gray sweatpants and a wrinkled pullover. His hair stood up in uneven patches. He looked like a man who had not slept, a man who had spent the last several hours watching his artificial empire dissolve on a banking application. He slapped his palm against the brass panel, hitting my apartment number again. I did not trigger the electronic lock. I pressed the communication button. I did not raise my voice. I spoke directly into the microphone. I simply said his name. Preston jumped, startled by the sudden audio connection. He leaned close to the speaker grill. His voice crackled through the intercom, distorted and breathless. He demanded I let him upstairs immediately. He attempted to project his usual arrogant authority, but the underlying panic ruined the delivery. He claimed a catastrophic glitch had frozen his financial accounts. He ordered me to call the bank branch and verify my identity so the risk department would lift the administrative hold. He actually believed he could order me to fix the damage. He thought a quick phone call could erase a digital footprint. I kept my finger pressed firmly on the communication button. I maintained a cold, factual cadence. I informed my brother there was no glitch in the banking software. I stated that the financial institution had reviewed the sworn affidavit of accounting he and Brenda voluntarily signed the previous night. I explained that the Internal Risk Analysis Department compared his sworn statement against the routing numbers of the outgoing wire transfers. I let a deliberate pause hang over the intercom frequency. I wanted the silence to amplify the severity of his situation. I told him the bank had formally initiated a federal fraud investigation. I used precise legal terminology, ensuring he understood the gravity of his circumstances. I listed the specific charges the institution was pursuing: wire fraud, forgery, elder financial exploitation. I explained that the account freeze was an automated federal protocol designed to prevent asset flight during an active criminal probe. I stated that I possessed zero power to stop the investigation. I could not simply call a customer service representative and cancel a federal inquiry. The machine was in motion, and he was standing directly in its path. The silence from the vestibule stretched for 10 seconds. The grainy camera feed showed Preston staring blankly at the brass panel. The blood drained from his face, rendering his skin a pale, sickly gray on the monitor. The magnitude of the crisis finally breached his ego. He realized the stolen operating capital was gone. The luxury condo deposit, the business credit lines, his personal savings, all of it was locked behind an impenetrable firewall. When a cornered man realizes he can no longer charm or manipulate his way out of a consequence, he often resorts to intimidation. Preston's panic morphed into a desperate, hollow rage. He leaned into the microphone, his voice cracking, shedding any remaining pretense of sibling affection. He threatened to sue me for defamation. He threatened to bring his own lawyers to my corporate office and ruin my professional reputation. He hurled crude insults, his words echoing through the small vestibule, claiming I was destroying the family over a petty grudge. I listened to the tirade. I did not interrupt. I waited until he paused to draw a ragged breath. I pressed the talk button one final time. I informed him that I was documenting this interaction. I stated that he was currently standing on private property, uninvited, harassing a key witness in an active financial investigation. I delivered a clear, unyielding ultimatum. I told him he had exactly 30 seconds to walk out of the vestibule and return to his vehicle. I explained that if he remained on the premises, I would dial emergency services and request an officer dispatch. I noted that a formal trespassing charge would look terrible sitting next to a pending federal indictment. I released the button. I did not step away from the monitor. Preston stood frozen for 3 seconds, weighing the threat. He looked up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the vestibule ceiling. He realized I was not bluffing. I was not the sister who absorbed his tantrums to keep the peace. I was the auditor who held his fate in a manila folder. His shoulders slumped. The hollow rage evaporated, leaving only genuine terror. He turned around, pushed the heavy glass doors open, and walked out into the brisk morning air. He did not look back. I watched him cross the street, his posture defeated, a man walking toward a profound reckoning. I stepped away from the intercom. The silence in my apartment returned, but it felt remarkably different. For 32 years, the power dynamic in my family operated on a fixed axis. Brenda dictated the terms, Preston reaped the rewards, and I absorbed the collateral damage. That axis had just snapped. The quiet daughter, the invisible sister they assumed would always yield, now held unyielding control over their futures. The paper trail had spoken, and the morning panic was merely the opening chapter of their ruin. Preston walking out of my apartment vestibule was merely the physical manifestation of his retreat. The digital avalanche chasing him was moving much faster. When a financial institution initiates a federal asset freeze, the consequences do not unfold over weeks. They detonate in a matter of hours. The architecture of a life built on stolen capital is incredibly fragile, and removing a single support beam brings the entire structure crashing down. My brother always required the visual markers of wealth to validate his ego. The midnight blue Range Rover he drove to the upscale steakhouse was not purchased with cash. High-end dealerships structure those luxury leases around automatic monthly debits linked directly to a primary checking account. Lenders operating in the premium automotive sector monitor their portfolios with ruthless efficiency. When Preston's bank locked his accounts on Wednesday night, his scheduled vehicle payment bounced the following morning. Financial algorithms do not offer grace periods for accounts flagged under suspicion of wire fraud. By Friday afternoon, a flatbed tow truck idled outside Preston's luxury condominium complex. The recovery agents did not knock on his door to negotiate. They simply secured the axles, engaged the winch, and dragged the vehicle onto the steel ramp. Preston stood on the sidewalk, wearing the same wrinkled pullover from the day before, watching his primary status symbol roll away in front of his affluent neighbors. He could not write a check to stop them. He could not swipe a card. The repossession of the vehicle was only a surface wound compared to the corporate hemorrhage occurring across town. Preston's boutique logistics startup was not a solo venture. He relied on the capital of two silent partners, men he met at a country club mixer, who possessed genuine wealth and expected steep quarterly returns. Those investors tolerated Preston's arrogance because he promised them a rapid expansion, fueled by the mysterious influx of capital he claimed to have secured from a private angel investor. That angel investor was our dying father. When the bank locked Preston's commercial line of credit, the startup's operational infrastructure stalled. Payroll failed to process. The warehouse lease payment reversed. Frightened vendors halted their pending shipments. The two silent partners demanded answers. When Preston refused to pick up his phone, they drove directly to the corporate bank branch. A manager handed the investors a heavily redacted notice citing a federal compliance hold. Men who build real wealth do not wait for explanations. They hired an independent forensic accountant that same afternoon. It takes a seasoned professional less than an hour to trace a seed money deposit back to its origin. The partners reviewed the ledger and realized Preston did not just mismanage their operating budget. He had capitalized their corporate entity with money siphoned from an elder's estate account. He had unknowingly implicated their business in a federal crime. They did not try to help him. They changed the electronic locks on the office doors. They drafted a lawsuit to sever their liability, preparing to hold Preston personally responsible for every lost dollar. In less than 48 hours, his title as a corporate founder evaporated. While Preston's daily life disintegrated, the legal shield Brenda had purchased for him was quietly dismantling itself. Gavin did not call Lyle to argue over the phone. Sharks do not announce their bites. Gavin sent a bonded courier to the strip mall office. The courier handed Lyle's receptionist a thick, sealed envelope requiring a direct signature. Inside that envelope was a formal notice of intent to litigate. Gavin included pristine copies of the forged power of attorney, the bank wire timestamps, and the stark white affidavit of accounting. He highlighted the perjury clause Preston and Brenda had signed with their own hands. Lyle was a volume operator who thrived on intimidating, uninformed families. He routinely skirted the edge of ethical boundaries, but he was not a fool. He understood the difference between a messy civil dispute over a piece of land and a documented felony. A lawyer can defend a client accused of making a mistake. A lawyer cannot defend a client who submits fabricated documents to a financial institution without risking his own livelihood. The State Bar Association revokes licenses for that exact infraction. Lyle read the notice and saw the lethal precision of the paper trap. He realized Brenda and Preston had lied to him about the origin of the funds, and they had just handed opposing counsel the written proof. He did not call Brenda to offer comfort. He drafted a formal letter of withdrawal citing a severe and irreconcilable conflict of interest. He emailed the notice to Brenda and mailed a hard copy to the municipal court. He dropped them as clients immediately, leaving my mother and brother legally exposed, unrepresented, and entirely alone to face the impending fallout. With Lyle out of the way, Gavin executed the final procedural strike. He filed an emergency lis pendens at the county recorder's office in Bucks County. In real estate law, a lis pendens translates to a pending suit. It acts as a digital and physical beacon, warning any potential buyer, lender, or developer that the title to a specific parcel is actively contested in court. It clouds the deed. Corporate developers looking to build logistics hubs do not purchase contested land. They require clean, unencumbered titles to secure their own construction financing. The moment Gavin's filing hit the public registry, the commercial developers eyeing my father's 40 acres ran their routine title updates. They saw the red flag. The $2.5 million windfall Preston and Brenda were counting on vanished into thin air. Brenda could not borrow against the property to hire a new defense attorney. Preston could not sell a single acre to pay off his furious business partners. The real estate was trapped in amber, untouchable, and useless to them. The layers of conflict overlapped with mathematical precision. Preston faced total financial ruin. Brenda faced criminal complicity for witnessing a perjured document and facilitating the theft. Their weapons of choice, artificial urgency, and family guilt, were rendered useless against the cold mechanics of forensic evidence. I sat at my kitchen table on Friday evening reviewing the confirmation receipts from Gavin. I did not need to confront my abusers. I did not need to demand an apology. I just had to watch the natural consequences of their greed consume the lives they tried to build on my father's grave. The silence in my apartment was broken by a sharp knock at my front door. I set my laptop aside and walked down the hallway. I looked through the peephole. A man in a plain windbreaker stood in the corridor holding a thick yellow envelope. I opened the door. He asked to confirm my identity. I nodded. He handed me the envelope, stated I had been served, and walked away toward the elevators. I brought the package inside and broke the seal. It was not a threat from Preston or a desperate plea from Brenda. It was a formal summons from the county probate court. The emergency injunction Gavin filed had landed on a judge's desk. Probate judges handle routine inheritance squabbles every day, but they rarely encounter a docket containing verified bank fraud, a forged legal instrument, and a documented perjury trap. The evidence breached the threshold of standard civil procedure. The judge had read the initial fraud reports. He issued a mandatory order for all named parties to appear in his courtroom the following Tuesday. The private war my family started in a suburban dining room was about to be dragged into the harsh, unforgiving light of a public tribunal. I read the date on the summons, folded the paper, and set it on the granite counter. The final reckoning had been scheduled. The text message arrived on my phone early Monday morning. Preston did not use his customary arrogant tone. He did not issue demands or throw insults. The message was a single, brief paragraph, devoid of capital letters or proper punctuation. He begged for a meeting. He pleaded with me to choose a neutral location, anywhere outside the family home or a law firm. He promised he had a solution that would benefit everyone. I selected an independent coffee shop located in the heart of the downtown financial district. The establishment catered to corporate litigators and investment bankers taking early morning meetings. The environment was quiet, well-lit, and highly public. I did not intend to go alone. I invited Gavin to accompany me. Before Gavin transitioned into private probate law, he spent 8 years working as a state prosecutor. He possessed an innate ability to sit in total silence and read the physical tells of a cornered suspect. We arrived 10 minutes early and secured a table near the back corner, offering a clear view of the entrance. When Preston walked through the glass door, the physical transformation was stark. Merely a week ago, he had strolled into an upscale steakhouse radiating unearned confidence, wearing a custom navy suit and a luxury timepiece. The man scanning the coffee shop this morning looked deeply ill. His skin held a gray, waxy pallor. Heavy dark circles bruised the delicate skin under his eyes. He wore a crumpled button-down shirt, the collar uneven. The $15,000 Rolex was missing from his left wrist, likely pawned over the weekend or seized by his furious business partners to cover their immediate losses. He spotted us and walked over. His steps lacked their usual deliberate swagger. He stopped at the edge of the table, his eyes darting toward Gavin. He swallowed hard. Preston recognized that the presence of seasoned legal counsel meant his customary tactics of emotional manipulation and familial guilt were useless. Gavin did not offer a handshake. He simply nodded toward the empty wooden chair opposite us. Preston sat down. He did not go to the counter to order a drink. His hands trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a folded piece of paper and smoothed it out on the table. It was a formal settlement agreement, hastily drafted and printed on standard copy paper. He pushed the document toward me, his fingers lingering on the edge. He spoke in a raspy, uneven whisper, constantly glancing over his shoulder, as if he expected federal agents to walk through the door at any moment. He laid out his proposal. He offered to relinquish his entire 50% claim to the Bucks County acreage. He promised to sign over the full commercial value of the land, all $2.5 million, directly into my name by the end of the business day. He framed this offering as a generous concession, a grand gesture designed to heal our fractured sibling bond and put the ugliness of the past week behind us. Then he outlined his condition. He leaned across the table, a thin sheen of sweat catching the ambient light on his forehead. He asked me to contact the internal risk department at the financial institution and the presiding judge handling the probate docket. He needed me to officially retract my initial fraud report. He begged me to state on the public record that the missing liquid funds were the result of a simple, tragic misunderstanding. He wanted me to testify that our dying father had authorized a verbal, unrecorded gift to fund the boutique logistics startup. He asked me to tell the authorities that the forged power of attorney and the perjured accounting affidavit were just misguided administrative shortcuts taken by a grieving son trying to manage a chaotic estate. He promised that if I gave him this one favor, he would walk away and never ask me for another dime. I sat back in my chair and looked at the man sitting across from me. I thought about my father during his final days in the hospice facility. Harrison Miller spent his entire life working honest, grueling hours to build a modest safety net for his retirement. At the end of his life, he lost his motor function, his independence, and his voice. I remembered the distinct sterile smell of the medical ward. I remembered watching my father struggle to draw a single breath while the heart monitor beeped in the quiet room. While our father lay in that bed, stripped of his dignity, Preston was busy wiring stolen capital to secure a downtown penthouse and bragging about new beginnings on social media. I did not feel a sudden surge of anger. Anger requires a level of emotional investment I no longer possessed for my brother. I felt a cold, clinical clarity. I folded my hands, resting them near my coffee cup. I kept my voice pitched low, ensuring my tone remained even and factual. I explained the basic mechanics of the justice system to my brother. I told him you can negotiate civil disputes over property lines, disputed inheritance shares, or breached contracts. You can bargain away a piece of land in a private boardroom. However, you cannot negotiate away a federal offense. I stated clearly that wire fraud, perjury, and elder financial exploitation are not private family misunderstandings. They are statutory crimes against the public trust. I informed him that the jurisdiction over his actions no longer belonged to me. By submitting the forged signature to the bank and signing the false affidavit under penalty of perjury, he transferred ownership of the problem to the state authorities. I told him that even if I wanted to call the bank and lie on his behalf, the investigators would never believe me because the digital footprints he left behind were undeniable. Preston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. He could not comprehend a scenario where a financial bribe failed to purchase compliance. I reached down into my work tote resting on the floor. I did not pull out a single sheet of paper to counter his offer. I extracted a thick, heavy 3-ring binder. The spine measured 3 inches across. I had spent the weekend organizing the evidence with rigid plastic dividers and color-coded tabs, applying the strict organizational principles of a supply chain audit. I set the heavy binder on the wooden table between us. The impact produced a solid, satisfying thud. I walked him through the contents, tapping each colored section as I spoke. I explained that the red tabs indicated the routed bank wires, matching the exact dollar amounts to his corporate shell company. The blue tabs held the fabricated power of attorney, complete with a professional handwriting analysis proving the signature was forged. The yellow tabs contained the sworn, perjured affidavit he and Brenda signed in the dining room, trapped next to the contradictory medical timeline. The green tabs held the commercial zoning maps and the corporate registry, proving his motive to seize the real estate. I flipped to the very last section. I told him the final tab contained a transcribed, word-for-word copy of the frantic voicemail Brenda left on my phone, explicitly admitting she knew he stole the cash and helped him cover it up. I pushed the heavy binder across the table. It stopped inches from his chest. I advised him to take it. I told him to hire the most competent criminal defense attorney he could find on credit and to hand that binder directly to whoever took his case. I explained that the prosecuting attorney would possess an identical copy by the end of the week, and his legal counsel needed to know exactly what kind of evidence they were fighting against. Preston stared down at the plastic tabs. His eyes grew wide, glassy, and vacant. His breathing became shallow. The reality of his situation crushed whatever remaining hope he had carried into the coffee shop. He realized the quiet sister he bullied for 3 decades had meticulously documented every single step of his destruction. I had built an impenetrable fortress of paperwork, leaving him with 0 leverage, 0 capital, and 0 escape routes. Gavin stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and motioned toward the exit. I picked up my purse and followed him. We left my brother sitting alone at the corner table, staring at the physical weight of his own ruin, just as the financial institution prepared to hand the entire investigation over to state authorities, forcing our mother to make a very difficult choice. Financial institutions do not operate on emotion or family politics. They operate on strict regulatory compliance and liability reduction. 2 days after my meeting at the coffee shop, the Internal Risk Department concluded their preliminary review of the evidence I provided. Sterling, the lead analyst, executed a mandatory reporting protocol. He transmitted the digital binder containing the forged documents, the routed transaction logs, and the perjured affidavit directly to the state authorities. The case bypassed standard civil litigation channels and landed on the desk of a specialized financial crimes unit within the district attorney's office. Adult Protective Services joined the inquiry simultaneously, given the age and medical vulnerability of my late father at the time of the initial theft. The bureaucratic machinery awoke, slow but unyielding. Law enforcement officers do not announce their arrivals. They prefer the advantage of surprise, especially when dealing with white-collar suspects who might destroy paperwork if given advance notice. On Wednesday afternoon, 2 detectives and a state investigator parked an unmarked sedan in front of my mother's house. They walked up the paved driveway, knocked on the front door, and presented their credentials. They did not bring handcuffs. They did not arrest her on the spot. They simply asked her to sit at her own kitchen table and answer a few routine questions regarding Harrison Miller's estate. Brenda had spent 3 decades cultivating a pristine suburban image. She thrived on controlling the narrative, presenting our family as a picture of upper-middle-class perfection to anyone who would listen. She hosted charity luncheons and garden club meetings in that exact kitchen. Sitting across from sworn officers holding copies of her own signature on a fraudulent document, her carefully constructed image shattered. The lead detective laid out the timeline with clinical precision. He explained the statutory penalties for facilitating elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, and perjury. He outlined the minimum sentencing guidelines for a co-conspirator in a felony enterprise. He placed a photocopy of the white affidavit on the table, pointing to her signature resting directly beneath the perjury clause. My mother always weaponized the concept of family loyalty to protect her favorite child. She demanded my silence to shield his mistakes. She expected me to surrender my financial future to ensure his comfort. However, toxic loyalty is inherently transactional. It only survives when the cost of maintaining the lie is paid by someone else. The moment the cost shifted to her own freedom, her maternal devotion evaporated. Facing the reality of a prison sentence, Brenda broke. She did not ask for a defense attorney to represent her interests. She did not try to cover for my brother or invent a plausible excuse for the missing capital. She started talking, and she did not stop. She threw Preston under the tires of the investigation with ruthless efficiency. She claimed she possessed zero knowledge of the missing funds until after the funeral took place. She wept, adopting a brand new victim persona, stating Preston manipulated her grief during her most vulnerable hours. She swore he forced her to sign the accounting affidavit at the dining room table, threatening to abandon her in her old age if she refused to comply. She painted him as a predatory opportunist who used his dying father as an automated teller machine. She signed a formal written statement right there in her kitchen, detailing every lie he told her, officially turning state's evidence against her golden child to save her own skin. Gavin received a courtesy call from the prosecuting attorney later that evening, summarizing the contents of Brenda's confession. He relayed the conversation to me. I sat in my living room watching the streetlights flicker on outside my window. I processed the magnitude of the betrayal. The woman who demanded I surrender a multi-million-dollar inheritance to keep the peace had just handed the authorities the rope to hang her own son. It was a profound, quiet revelation. For years, I believed I had to fight them to secure my boundaries. I thought I needed to argue my case, present logic, and demand basic respect. I realized I never needed to shout to be heard. I never needed to match their volume or engage in their theatrical displays of emotion. I only needed to step out of their way, erect a firm legal boundary, and let their inherent greed consume them. The foundation of their alliance was built entirely on my willingness to absorb the damage. The moment I refused to play my assigned role, they devoured each other to survive. The fallout from Brenda's confession rippled straight into the municipal court system. Probate judges despise fraud above all other infractions. Their entire jurisdiction relies on the sacred trust placed in an executor to protect the wishes of the deceased. When a judge receives verified notification from a district attorney that an acting executor is under active criminal investigation for looting the estate, the judicial response is immediate and severe. Our scheduled hearing was preempted by an emergency administrative ruling. The judge reviewed Gavin's injunction filings alongside the sworn statement provided by the local police department. The court did not wait for the criminal trial to conclude before taking protective measures. The civil remedy was swift. The judge issued an immediate unilateral decree from his chambers. Preston was formally stripped of his status as the executor of Harrison Miller's estate. The court cited gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and pending criminal indictments as the primary factors for his immediate removal. The sudden vacancy required a replacement to manage the frozen assets. The judge reviewed the original lineage of the estate and the meticulous documentation submitted by my legal counsel. He drafted a secondary order transferring the full administrative authority over the entire estate directly to me. I was appointed the sole uncontested administrator. The certified mail arrived on a Friday morning. I stood in my kitchen and opened the heavy cardboard envelope with a letter opener. Inside rested a stack of crisp, watermarked papers bearing the raised seal of the county court. I read the presiding judge's signature at the bottom of the final page. The decree granted me exclusive, unchecked control over the remaining liquid assets, the personal property, and the 40 acres of commercial land in Bucks County. Preston lost his access to the real estate he coveted. He lost his access to the bank accounts he drained. He lost the ability to speak on behalf of our father or manage the family legacy. Brenda lost her influence, her spotless reputation, and her favorite son. The legal wall I started building the night I found the empty bank statement in the foyer was now fully cemented. They were locked out, legally and permanently, from the wealth they tried to steal. I placed the court decree inside my leather portfolio right next to the original bank transcripts. I held the keys to the kingdom. Yet the paper trail was not finished speaking. Preston and Brenda still had to face the extended relatives who watched them perform their theater of grief at the dinner table. The private ruin was complete. The public reckoning was just beginning. The municipal courthouse smelled of floor wax, aged oak, and nervous perspiration. Tuesday morning arrived with a sharp, biting chill in the air, a fitting climate for the sterile environment of a legal tribunal. I walked through the heavy double doors of courtroom 4B alongside Gavin. We took our seats at the petitioner table. The space was cavernous, designed to intimidate, featuring high ceilings and dark wood paneling that absorbed the ambient sound. I set my thick, meticulously tabbed binder on the table. Behind the wooden partition separating the legal teams from the public, the gallery benches began to fill. Family gossip travels significantly faster than official court summons. The sudden, unceremonious removal of my brother as the estate executor had triggered a seismic shockwave through our extended bloodline. Aunt Patricia and Cousin Mitchell walked into the courtroom, taking seats in the second row. They looked deeply confused. Patricia prided herself on serving as the moral compass of our family tree. She spent her entire adult life curating an image of pious, unwavering loyalty, frequently lecturing younger relatives on the importance of tradition. Mitchell worshipped success, measuring a person's worth by their zip code and vehicle model. At the reconciliation dinner, they had both eagerly participated in my character assassination, firmly believing Preston was a self-sacrificing hero. Now they sat in a cold courtroom, whispering frantically to one another, entirely unaware that the narrative they championed was about to be publicly dismantled. Preston sat alone at the defense table. The high-priced, aggressive defense attorney he desperately needed was nowhere to be found, likely because retaining top-tier legal counsel requires a steep upfront cash retainer. Preston possessed zero liquid capital. He was flanked by a junior public defender who looked exhausted and entirely unprepared for a complex financial fraud docket. My brother wore a gray suit that hung loosely on his frame. He kept his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, avoiding the gaze of the relatives sitting just a few feet behind him. Brenda entered the courtroom last. She did not sit near Patricia or Mitchell. She selected a seat in the very back row, clutching her leather purse tightly in her lap. She looked pale and diminished. The alliance she built with her favorite child had dissolved the moment she signed her confession for the state investigators. She sat in self-imposed isolation, a spectator to the ruin she helped orchestrate. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Marcus Thorne took the bench. He was a veteran jurist who had spent 2 decades untangling the toxic, bitter remnants of shattered families. He possessed a reputation for strict procedural discipline and a zero-tolerance policy for fiduciary deception. He reviewed the docket notes, adjusted his reading glasses, and instructed Gavin to call his first witness. Gavin stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and called my name. I stood up, picked up my heavy binder, and walked toward the witness box. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at my brother. I kept my posture straight and my steps measured. The bailiff administered the oath. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and adjusted the microphone. Gavin began the direct examination. He did not ask leading emotional questions. He treated the inquiry like a clinical audit. He asked me to state my profession for the record. I informed the court I was a supply chain auditor specializing in tracing missing inventory and verifying contract compliance. Gavin then instructed me to open my binder to the red section. He asked me to detail the timeline of Harrison Miller's final days. I leaned toward the microphone. I did not raise my voice or inject a single ounce of sorrow into my delivery. I spoke with the flat, undeniable authority of a ledger. I read the hospice admission dates into the public record. I described the escalation of my father's pain management protocol. I stated the exact dosage of the continuous morphine drip administered by the nursing staff. I cited the attending physician's notes documenting that by October 20th, the patient was unresponsive, lacking the motor function to hold a pen, and entirely incapable of comprehending complex financial decisions. The courtroom remained dead silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of the court reporter's stenograph machine. Gavin moved to the next exhibit. He asked me to read the dates and amounts of the outgoing wire transfers from the estate checking account. I turned the page. I read the numbers, letting each figure echo through the cavernous room. October 12th, $75,000. October 19th, $80,000. October 26th, $42,000. I verified the destination routing numbers, confirming the cash was deposited into an LLC holding account registered to Preston and a luxury real estate brokerage in Center City. I glanced at the gallery. Aunt Patricia's face had drained of all color. Her hand covered her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Mitchell sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched in his cheek. They were performing the mental arithmetic. They realized that while they were praising Preston for his devotion, he was actively looting a dying man's savings to fund a penthouse lifestyle. The foundation of their judgment crumbled in real time. Gavin then asked me to turn to the yellow section of the binder. He requested I identify Exhibit C. I pulled the stark white affidavit of accounting from the plastic sleeve. I held it up. I informed the court that this document was presented to my brother during a family dinner in front of several witnesses seated in the gallery today. I stated that the document required the acting executor to disclose the true destination of the liquid assets. Gavin asked me to read the final clause aloud. I looked directly at Preston. He was staring at the table, his shoulders hunched, physically shrinking under the weight of the exposure. I read the perjury clause into the microphone. I stated that the signatories swore under penalty of perjury that 0 funds were transferred for personal use and that all depleted capital went exclusively toward legitimate medical care. I flipped to the signature line. I read my brother's name. I read my mother's name on the witness line. The silence in the gallery shifted from confusion to profound, unadulterated disgust. The gaslighting was over. The illusion of the golden child and the martyr mother was dead. I had not argued with them at the dining room table. I had not defended my character or pleaded for their understanding. I had simply gathered the receipts, waited for a sworn judge to take the bench, and let the paperwork do the shouting. Preston's junior public defender did not even attempt a cross-examination. There was nothing to cross-examine. A lawyer cannot argue with a timestamp. He cannot dispute a bank routing number. He cannot cross-examine a forged signature. The defense rested without calling a single witness, effectively surrendering to the mountain of forensic evidence. Gavin thanked me and indicated he had no further questions. I closed the heavy binder. The sharp snap of the plastic rings echoed through the quiet room. I stepped down from the witness box and walked back to the petitioner table. The power dynamic in my family had been permanently, irreversibly inverted. I sat down next to my attorney, feeling a profound sense of clarity. Judge Thorne gathered the exhibits. He stacked the bank transcripts on top of the forged power of attorney and the perjured affidavit. He aligned the edges of the paper with methodical care. He removed his reading glasses and looked down from the elevated bench. His gaze bypassed the attorneys and locked directly onto Preston. The judge's expression held zero sympathy, radiating the cold, stern authority of a man preparing to deliver a ruling that would alter the structure of our bloodline forever. Judge Marcus Thorne did not deliver his ruling with theatrical flair. He spoke with the measured, fatal cadence of a metronome. He looked down from the elevated bench, his gaze boring into the man sitting at the defense table. He stated that in his 20 years presiding over probate dockets, he had rarely witnessed such a brazen, documented betrayal of a dying parent. He began with the civil penalties, dissecting Preston's actions layer by layer. The judge declared my brother's conduct represented a textbook egregious breach of fiduciary duty. When an individual assumes the mantle of an executor, even through illegitimate means, they bear a strict legal obligation to protect the assets of the deceased. Preston chose to treat those assets as a personal slush fund. Because of this verified deception, the court issued a structural mandate. Judge Thorne formally voided any and all claims Preston held to the Harrison Miller estate. My brother was permanently disinherited by judicial decree. He would not receive a single penny, a single keepsake, or a single acre of our father's legacy. Stripping him of his future inheritance was insufficient to balance the ledger. The court ordered immediate, full restitution of the stolen liquid capital. The judge levied a formal surcharge against Preston for the exact amount traced through the bank wires. He owed the estate $197,000, payable immediately. I sat at the petitioner table and watched my brother absorb the mathematical reality of that sentence. A surcharge in probate court is not a polite suggestion. It is an enforceable judgment. Because the bank had already frozen and seized his remaining operational capital, Preston possessed zero liquidity. To satisfy this court order, the state would systematically liquidate his remaining life. His personal bank accounts would be drained. His remaining material possessions would be auctioned. His future wages would be garnished. He had tried to steal financial independence, and in return, the court guaranteed his perpetual bankruptcy. Judge Thorne then shifted his focus to the physical property. He referenced the emergency injunction Gavin filed regarding the Bucks County acreage. The judge dissolved the fraudulent corporate entity Preston created to catch the deed. He stated that since my brother had forfeited his inheritance rights through criminal deception, the entirety of the real estate transferred to the sole remaining lawful heir. The judge signed the decree on his desk. That singular stroke of ink officially and irrevocably deeded the 40 acres of prime commercial land directly to me. The $2.5 million asset, the prize my family tried to pry from my hands using guilt and artificial urgency, was now secured behind an impenetrable legal fortress. The civil sanctions merely represented the first phase of the reckoning. Judge Thorne folded his hands over the case file. He announced that the jurisdiction of a probate court was insufficient to address the severity of the fabricated documents. He looked at the court reporter and instructed her to furnish a certified transcript of the morning's testimony. The judge declared he was issuing a formal criminal referral to the district attorney. He explicitly cited the forged signature on the power of attorney and the calculated orchestration of elder financial exploitation. He advised Preston's junior public defender to prepare his client for a separate, impending felony arraignment. The color drained entirely from my brother's face. The looming threat of financial ruin suddenly paled in comparison to the tangible, approaching reality of a state penitentiary. The gavel had not finished falling. Judge Thorne lifted his gaze toward the back of the gallery. He located Brenda, sitting in her self-imposed isolation. He did not ask my mother to take the stand, but he delivered a blistering public reprimand that echoed off the high ceiling. He stated that enabling a theft was morally indistinguishable from executing it. He officially stripped Brenda of any residual administrative rights or claims to the estate structure. He barred her from ever serving in a fiduciary capacity within the county limits. She shrank into her wooden bench, her carefully curated suburban image reduced to ashes in front of the very relative she spent decades trying to impress. Finally, the judge addressed the absent architect of the initial quitclaim deed. He noted that although Lyle had formally withdrawn his counsel, abandoning a sinking ship did not erase the ethical violations committed while at the helm. Judge Thorne ordered the court clerk to forward the fraudulent deed, complete with its sweeping illegal indemnification clauses, directly to the State Bar Disciplinary Committee. The attorney who threatened to lock me out of my inheritance would now have to fight to keep his own legal license. The hearing concluded. Judge Thorne struck his gavel against the sounding block, adjourned the session, and retreated to his chambers. The silence that followed was heavy and final. The aunts and cousins in the gallery did not rush forward to offer Preston comfort. They did not gather around Brenda to express their sympathy. Aunt Patricia and Cousin Mitchell stood up, gathered their coats, and walked out of the double doors without looking back. The illusion of family unity was dead killed by the undeniable gravity of forensic evidence. I remained seated at the petitioner table for a few moments, letting the profound silence wash over me. For 32 years, I had operated as the invisible scaffolding of my family. I was the daughter expected to absorb the shockwaves of my brother's failures and my mother's enabling. They assumed my quiet nature was a symptom of weakness. They thought they could demand my inheritance, hand me a pen, and dictate my compliance. They were wrong. I had not raised my voice. I had not engaged in a single screaming match. I had not begged for their respect or their love. I had simply gathered the receipts, built an unbreakable wall of paperwork, and let their own entitlement crush them against it. The meticulous documents in my binder had served as the ultimate armor. I reached out and closed the heavy 3-ring binder. The sharp snap of the plastic cover felt like a period at the end of a very long, exhausting sentence. I turned to Gavin. I thanked him for his precision and his unwavering counsel. He offered a rare, genuine smile, shook my hand, and began packing his briefcase. I stood up. I did not cast a final, triumphant glance at Preston, who remained frozen at the defense table, staring into the abyss of his own making. I did not look at Brenda, still weeping quietly in the back row. They were no longer my responsibility. They were strangers, dealing with the consequences of their own choices. I turned my back on the courtroom. I walked down the center aisle, pushing open the heavy wooden double doors. I traversed the marble corridor of the municipal building, my heels clicking, a steady, unhurried rhythm. I pushed through the main exit and stepped out into the crisp Pennsylvania morning. The gray, overcast sky had broken, giving way to bright, unfiltered sunlight. I stood on the concrete steps and closed my eyes for a fraction of a second. I felt the warmth of the sun radiating against my face. The cold, sterile air of the courthouse vanished, replaced by the fresh, biting wind of the changing season. I took a deep breath. My chest felt remarkably light. The crushing weight of toxic loyalty, the endless demands, the relentless gaslighting, all of it was gone. Severed by a judge's decree and my own refusal to yield. I adjusted the strap of my leather portfolio over my shoulder and walked toward my car, stepping into a future that belonged entirely, undeniably, to me. 6 months have passed since the gavel fell in Judge Thorne's courtroom. The bitter gray Pennsylvania winter has melted into a vibrant and humid June. I am standing on the wraparound wooden porch of the Bucks County farmhouse. My father purchased this land 4 decades ago, long before the county expanded and the highways encroached on the rural borders. The air this morning smells of damp soil, sweet grass, and the faint distant hum of diesel engines. I did not sell the acreage. Handing the deed over to a corporate developer for a single lump sum payout felt too similar to the careless liquidation my brother originally orchestrated. My father spent his life measuring long-term value, and I intended to honor that philosophy. Instead of surrendering the title, I utilized my professional background in supply chain audits to negotiate a highly structured 99-year commercial ground lease. The logistics firm secured the right to construct their regional distribution center on the far eastern edge of the property, directly adjacent to the new highway interchange. In exchange, the estate receives a substantial recurring monthly dividend. The developer assumes the tax liabilities and the infrastructure costs. I retain the underlying title to the soil, the original farmhouse, and a generous buffer of old-growth trees that shields the porch from the sightline of the commercial zone. The land is no longer just a dormant asset. It is a highly profitable, sustainable enterprise that generates passive generational wealth. I secured the legacy my family tried to pry from my hands, and I ensured it will outlast all of us. The individuals who attempted to steal this legacy are currently navigating a very different reality. Preston is awaiting his criminal trial. The district attorney did not offer a lenient plea agreement. The forensic evidence I provided, the digital wire routing numbers, the forged power of attorney, and the perjured accounting affidavit proved too overwhelming for any defense attorney to untangle. My brother surrendered his passport and posted a high bond, securing his temporary freedom until the autumn docket begins. His life in the interim bears zero resemblance to the luxury he previously projected. The silent partners from his boutique logistics startup did not just sever their professional ties. They initiated a relentless campaign to scorch his reputation across the regional financial sector. They ensured every country club acquaintance, every venture capitalist, and every local lending officer knew Preston funded his corporate ambitions using capital stolen from a dying elder. The corporate world closed its doors to him permanently. Without a college degree, without access to credit, and facing a pending felony indictment, my brother had to seek employment in the only sector that would accept him. He currently works at a sprawling big-box retail hardware store on the outskirts of the city. The man who wore tailored Navy suits to upscale steakhouses now wears a stiff polyester vest and a plastic name tag. He spends his days standing under harsh fluorescent lights, scanning barcodes and loading bags of fertilizer into the trunks of customers' cars. He is learning the brutal, exhausting math of an hourly minimum wage, paying back his court-ordered restitution, a few agonizing dollars at a time. Brenda faces her own distinct brand of ruin. The isolation of an enabler is profound once the illusion of family unity fractures. Following the courtroom revelations, the extended relatives severed all contact. Aunt Patricia and Cousin Mitchell, having witnessed the undeniable, documented proof of her complicity in the theft, blocked her phone number and excluded her from every holiday gathering. Without Preston's stolen funds to float her expenses, and carrying the heavy social stigma of a public reprimand, my mother could no longer afford the maintenance or the mortgage on her large suburban home. She sold the house at a loss to cover her mounting legal debts. She now resides in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the opposite side of the county. She attempts to bridge the vast silence between us using superficial gestures. Every few weeks, a piece of mail arrives at the farmhouse bearing her distinct, looping handwriting. She sends pastel greeting cards for minor holidays, filling the margins with vague, passive statements about forgiveness, moving forward, and the importance of blood ties. She never apologizes for her actions. She only apologizes for the fact that the family fell apart. I check the mailbox at the end of the long gravel driveway. I retrieve a pale pink envelope with her return address stamped on the corner. I walk back up the steps, cross the porch, and enter my home office. I do not open the envelope. I do not read the desperate, hollow words written inside. I walk directly to the heavy-duty paper shredder sitting beside my desk. I slide the sealed envelope into the intake slot. The machine hums to life. The steel blades catch the paper, pulling it downward with a sharp mechanical grind, turning the toxic sentiment into illegible ribbons of waste. I empty the plastic bin into the recycling unit. The boundary remains intact, unyielding, and secure. I walk back out to the porch and lean against the wooden railing, holding a ceramic mug of hot coffee. I reflect on the arduous journey of the past 6 months. I survived a calculated ambush orchestrated by the two people who were supposed to protect my interests. I did not win this war by fighting dirty. I did not lower myself to their level of emotional manipulation. I did not engage in theatrical shouting matches in front of extended relatives, nor did I waste my energy defending my character against fabricated accusations. I won by maintaining a cold, clinical grip on reality. I observed their actions, gathered the receipts, and built an impenetrable fortress of documentation. The bank transcripts, the zoning maps, the forged signature, and the perjured affidavit served as weapons forged in pure silence. I allowed the paper trail to speak for itself. Toxic loyalty is a dangerous currency. It demands that you set yourself on fire simply to keep someone else warm. It requires you to sacrifice your own stability, your own inheritance, and your own peace of mind to shield an abuser from the consequences of their own choices. When you refuse to strike the match, they will call you selfish. They will call you cold. They will orchestrate smear campaigns and attempt to isolate you from the herd. But the moment you stop absorbing their damage, they inevitably turn their destructive tendencies inward and burn themselves down. If you are listening to this, and you are the quiet one in your family, I want you to hear this clearly. Setting boundaries does not require you to raise your voice. You do not need to scream to be formidable. Documentation is the ultimate, unbreakable armor against gaslighting. True strength often lies in the silent, resolute act of packing your briefcase and walking away from a table that no longer serves you. Do not let anyone convince you that your calm demeanor is a symptom of weakness. Your quiet observation is your greatest tactical advantage. Let them talk. Let them lie. Let them underestimate you. While they are busy performing for an audience, you can quietly gather the evidence required to dismantle their entire stage. We often look at family portraits framed in polished oak and assume the bright smiles tell the unvarnished story. But in American culture, where the traditional nuclear family is frequently idealized as the ultimate unbreakable sanctuary, there is sometimes a quiet rot festering beneath the floorboards. The story of Arabella, Brenda, and Preston is not just a dramatic tale of inheritance, forged documents, and betrayal. It is a profound mirror reflecting the very foundation of how we raise our children, the essential boundaries we must set, and the catastrophic cost of toxic enabling love. It asks us to re-examine what it truly means to guide a child toward adulthood with honesty, fairness, and emotional awareness. Let us first examine the mother, Brenda. For 3 long decades, she performed what many misguided parents mistake for an act of deep, unconditional love. She smoothed the path in front of her son, Preston, so meticulously that he never once had to stumble over a stone of his own making. When he crashed his car at 17, she didn't hand him a broom to sweep up the glass or require him to pay for the damage. She handed him a shield, covering up the mistake entirely. When he dropped out of an expensive university program, she blamed the institution, fully insulating him from the harsh sting of failure. This is the ultimate danger of the modern parenting trap. By constantly taking the blame and absorbing the shock of her son's repeated mistakes, Brenda did not protect Preston. She fundamentally crippled him. She raised a man who genuinely believed that personal, family responsibility and consequences were myths meant only for other people. Overprotection suffocates a child's moral development. It breeds a terrifying, unchecked kind of entitlement. That entitlement eventually metastasized from minor suburban indiscretions into federal crimes. Misguided love led a mother to help her son forge a power of attorney, rationalizing the theft from a dying man's account simply to save a failing startup. It is a chilling wake-up call for anyone raising a family. Blind loyalty to the concept of blood ties can easily morph into a toxic tool, pushing our children down a dark path of self-destruction under the false guise of maternal protection. From a broader social perspective, this narrative forces us to confront the superficial values that so often obscure true morality in our modern world. We live in a society that frequently equates outward material success with inner worth. Preston's $15,000 Rolex and his luxury vehicle were hollow attempts to project a reality he had not earned. He and Brenda allowed their blinding greed for a $2.5 million plot of land to completely override their basic humanity. But greed is inherently self-destructive. It narrows the vision until the only thing visible is the prize, leaving the legal and moral traps entirely unseen. There is a universal law of karma at play here, a social reality that dictates what is built on a foundation of deception will inevitably collapse when the truth finally speaks. The universe has a poetic, unyielding way of balancing the scales. Preston, the man who flaunted fake wealth while stealing from a hospice bed, found himself stripped of his tailored suits. He was forced to carry fertilizer and scan barcodes for a minimum wage paycheck just to chip away at his court-ordered debt. Brenda, who prized her pristine reputation and suburban social standing above all else, lost her home and found herself entirely ostracized by the very relatives she spent years trying to impress. They chased illusions, and illusions evaporate the moment they are exposed to the harsh light of forensic truth. Yet within this absolute wreckage, there is a brilliant blueprint for profound self-improvement, emotional awareness, and resilience. Arabella stands as a masterclass in using intelligence and composure to cope with severe adversity. When cornered and ambushed by her entire extended family, she did not react with hysteria. She did not raise her voice or engage in the chaotic, draining theater of their emotional demands. Intelligence, in its truest form, is the ability to observe and understand without immediately reacting to the provocation. Arabella used her professional expertise to build a shadow ledger, dealing strictly in the cold, hard currency of facts and numbers. She knew exactly how to sit in silence, listening closely enough to find the fatal loopholes in her opponent's elaborate lies. More importantly, her ultimate victory was rooted in unshakable morality. She won not by playing dirty or using underhanded tactics, but by letting the undeniable truth speak for itself through authenticated documents and evidence. She refused to compromise her integrity, holding her ground even when Preston offered her a massive financial bribe to cover up his crimes. Arabella teaches us that true strength of character lies in steadfastness and the firm enforcement of boundaries. She proves that you do not need to shout to be formidable. Her greatest power was her capacity to calmly pack her briefcase and walk away from a deeply toxic relationship to protect her own peace of mind. To live a better, more authentic life, we must learn to collect the literal and metaphorical receipts of our own existence. We must choose to live responsibly, preserving real value, instead of constantly chasing fleeting, empty illusions. Silence and observation are not symptoms of weakness. They are the absolute greatest tactical advantages we possess in understanding the nature of the world and shielding ourselves from the people who seek to exploit our kindness. If you found value in this reflection, and if it made you pause to evaluate the boundaries and relationships in your own life, please consider joining our growing community. Subscribe and follow the channel, QT Told Stories, for more narratives that explore the quiet, complex, and often hidden depths of human nature. As you look around your own dinner table tonight at the familiar faces of the people you have sworn to protect, guide, and love, ask yourself a very difficult question. Are the paths you are so desperately clearing for them leading to genuine maturity and growth, or are you simply paving the smooth road to their eventual ruin? We all leave a lasting legacy behind in the people we raise, but whether that legacy becomes a solid foundation or a suffocating cage is a truth we often do not discover until it is far too late to change the lock. Take a moment to reflect on what you are truly building.